at the games. I mean, I'm very privileged to have the opportunity to be right in the heart now of standing up in front of athletes and selecting them, and talking to them, Steve, about the amazing opportunity through their dedication, hard work, to become an Olympian, and an Olympian that goes back to 1896. Great Britain have never ever missed an Olympic Games or an Olympic Winter Games since 1896, and we call it our unbreakable chain. And I talked to the athletes about how they are now part of this culture with our values and our behaviours and our anchors that go right back to 1896, and the importance of the Paris cohort, what we want to do as a Paris team, the legacy we want to leave, in addition to supporting their personal ambitions.
Well, welcome to the Supporting Champions podcast, everyone. Today I am joined by Mark England, Director of Sport Services at the British Olympic Association and Chef de Mission for Team GB at multiple Olympic Games. Mark has been at the forefront of British Olympic success, leading historic performances at the Rio and Tokyo Games. Mark, how are you? A few weeks away from the Games, how are you keeping?
I'm in good shape, thanks, Steve. Good to see you, and excited. Today is day one of kitting out here at the NEC, so I'm just up in the Midlands at the moment. I saw the sailors this morning. They're through. Got the rows this afternoon, and as you know, Steve, this will be back to back for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Importantly, if you don't mind me saying, importantly, this is the time in the cycle where athletes step into our environment. So typically right. I'll go to see them down at Portland, or in competition, or wherever they happen to be training. Today's the first day they come into our environment, and we're hoping to make it very, very special for them.
It's quite a transition moment, isn't it? That once you sort of get some kit, you sort of feel part of it. It is a moment, isn't it? Of actually, I feel part of something a bit bigger than myself. I've always had my head down for 4 years almost, and now I'm thinking, oh, it's real now. I'm an Olympian. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of 2 or 3 moments. One is obviously on the field of play, which is the formality of actually becoming an Olympian when you step on the field of play. But on the journey, there's qualification, then there's selection, formally being selected to the team. So the sailing team were formally selected, the majority of them last October. And then I was talking to them this morning, and they train all over the world, as everybody knows. And today this morning they were saying, it's going to be great to see the rowing team and be, for the first time, feel part of a much bigger team. And that's what we try to instill and develop all the time. And I think Great Britain are actually very, very good at this, the multi-sport environment, and bringing athletes together to create what we term as one Team GB. It's a really important part of our culture. So today was good. It's great. And then tomorrow we've got rowing, the second half of rowing, and triathlon. The following day it just goes on and on and on with athletes being able to mix and get to know each other better before they go to their respective preparation camps. Yeah,
there is something very powerful about it, going into that environment and seeing across some champions, some previous people that you've admired. Also for maybe young athletes, it can be somewhat overwhelming as well, can't it? How have you tried to manage that acceleration from small thinking to suddenly, okay, this is a big circus, this is a big event, there's some superstars around. How do you help athletes with that?
Yeah, it's very interesting, that, because one of, I guess, the legacies that I'd like to leave behind, Steve, is and I've been saying this to the athletes and to the sports every time I've been out to them, and the support staff. I've made a special play of welcoming first-time Olympians. So I'll give you a good example. Last Wednesday, I announced and selected the 42 rowers, 21 of whom have never been to an Olympic Games before. So there's a smattering from Tokyo, and then Helen Glover in her 4th Olympic Games, a good example. But I made a special talk and play with these 21 Olympians, just to say, look, everybody here has a place in this team. Everybody here has a voice in this team, and I want to feel that I want to ensure that you feel safe and secure in this environment, and my door is always open, and I want you to feel very much that you belong here, and bringing a new lens into Team GB. Please talk to us about your experiences and how you think we can do better, and that plays out in so many ways, just in terms of the videos that we produce. We've the opening, the kitting out here is one done by somebody who's close to your heart, Jess Ennis. So she's fronted all of that up, talking about first-time Olympians and the symbols, the lion and the crest, and just immersing people in that one team culture. And actually, I see it as our super strength. I see it as a performance advantage, and so that's why it's important to me. And actually, we can talk about this for a while, actually, because I took Tom Daley away when he was 13 for the first time. Then he was a 14-year-old Olympian in China. But I talked to him about his experience as a 13, 14-year-old in the team, and I took him to Sydney. And he said he hated it, not the Sydney Games, a youth festival. And he said he hated it, he was homesick. And there's others that I talked to, and it resonates with me really deeply. And that, I think to myself, well, if these guys are homesick and we're not making them feel like they belong here, we're not doing our job. And so ever since kind of 2015 and then Chef de Mission in 2016, I've worked really hard. Haven't always got it right, and there's still a lot more work to do to ensure we get this really cohesive one team unit. And that's why, as you know, that's why having preparation camps have been so special. And in Paris, a third of the team will be living outside of the Olympic Village, for a whole variety of reasons, mostly performance focused, and we need to work hard at how the sailing team in Marseille, or the cycling team down in near Versailles, the equestrian team and mod pen team and triathletes, and it goes on, how we ensure that during the games they all feel part of what is a fantastic opportunity to be part of the Great Britain and Northern Ireland Olympic team and Team GB.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting that you just sort of allude there to the balance between performance reasons versus collective unity. Some of that is obviously not going to be pragmatic. You won't necessarily have the sailing team next to the main Olympic Village unless it's based near the coast. But I suppose to a certain extent it sort of chips away at some of the event. Like not many athletes maybe attend, or not as many athletes attending the opening ceremony as they would have done, say, in 1992. When perhaps we weren't quite as clued into this. How do you capture that balance?
We encourage. I don't go back as far as 92, but we do.
But that was probably more ceremonial, wasn't it? It was those the decisions that came first and foremost. Whereas perhaps as athletes started to get more agency, I'm not going because I've got to compete tomorrow.
Well, the lottery funds athletes to compete and perform on the field of play. That's its purpose. That's what it's designed to do. And it's quite interesting, actually, because I think probably up to maybe 2004, probably before London was announced in 2005, but up to 2004, it was a great event to go to. And if you happen to win a medal and you happen to perform to the best of your ability, and you happen to post personal best and all the rest of it, that was great. But there was a celebration around that. There was the opening ceremony, the closing ceremony, the after party, after competition, and all this kind of stuff. But I, when I reflect back, I think it was London, but it was brutally brought home, I think, by a number of performance directors who had invested not only their own time and ambition and knowledge, but the lottery award to deliver success on the field of play. And I felt that probably from 2008 onwards, we at the British Olympic Association were forced in a very positive way to play catch up to national governing bodies who had what seemed at the time limitless financial resource to put in play the best coaches, the best ologists, the best equipment, technology and innovation. So as a non-government funded organisation, I've always felt we were playing catch up, and we were always reminded by key performance directors on the London cycle, rowing, sailing, equestrian and cycling in particular, the performance on the field of play. And I remember David Brailsford in the London cycle, because we had host nation places, so typically we'd take 350 athletes to a games. In London it was 541. We were the largest team because of host nation places. We actually took 13 teams, can you believe it, to the games. 2 volleyball, 2 basketball, rhythmic gymnastics, 2 water polo. And we were reminded quite starkly, look, Mark, what are you doing about protecting the performance of athletes who will qualify at the last Olympic Games, this Olympic Games, the next Olympic Games? They will win medals at these 3 games. And you've got this 300 athletes, cohort of athletes, who will never qualify for Olympic Games again, coming into our environment and wanting to party. And so I think the mindset and our focus changed very, very abruptly. And then when I took over in 2016, or had the opportunity to be chef de mission in 2016, I brought in play a couple of areas of focus which perhaps hadn't been there before, and I like to think that contributed to the success. But if it didn't contribute to the success, what it certainly did was focus people's and support staff's minds in a different direction than it had been before. So the games, as you know, it's an incredibly complicated operational logistical exercise. The biggest complexity outside of a war in many respects, and the mobilisation of everything is significant. So but I took that away, and that became a support structure to athletes and performance. So the athletes and the performance of athletes absolutely became the most important thing, and still is, and should always be the case. So and hopefully my successors will continue to have that focus. I'm sure they will.
And you've mentioned that there are several different concepts that I might sort of come back to, but you allude to the evolution of your role and the team's philosophy and perspective. Can I just sort of take you back to how you sort of first started? I mean, how did you get into this? I don't know this, actually. I remember meeting you at the Gold Coast holding camp in preparation for the 2000 Olympics. I didn't know your background. So what set you up that you're allowed to do this?
Well, I need to delve into the memory blocks a little bit on this one.
Do you remember what you were doing before this?
Well, I do, and I remember what I was doing before this. So just for the listeners, this is I'll have done 23 years, I think. So 2001, I was formally appointed, but as you rightly point out, I was on the Gold Coast doing that preparation camp, which was fantastic, and the success of the Sydney team was in a great part to do with that holding camp, that preparation camp, and the care, the medical care and support that the athletes got for a 2-3 week period before they went down to Sydney. It was that medical support was really important. But I was assistant director of the National Centres, which was the forerunner to the English Institute and the UK Sports Institute. So I was assistant director of the National Centres, and so I had responsibility for three of the centres, including Bisham Abbey and Crystal Palace, and before that I was head of sport for Glasgow City Council, and then before that I was actually with the Sports Council, the old Great Britain Sports Council in the London region, and I had responsibility for performance and excellence there, and I was also, just before Sydney, I was working as a consultant for Leisure Partners, Greenwich Leisure Limited, and we did a lot of work with national governing bodies and in particular the England and Wales Cricket Board did their performance plan and so on. And in that journey, I came across somebody who I'd known for a while, but came across and became very good friends with Kevin Hickey, who ran that preparation camp, and I was kind of losing my way a little bit, I guess, Steve. And I said to him, Kevin, I have you got anything I could do? And he said, well, if you want to take a secondment and come and work at the preparation camp, that would be great on the Gold Coast. And so I did that, and then 6 months later I got a call to say would I join the BOA full time. But the Gold Coast, I mean, I don't know what your reflections are of it, Steve, but it did, and I was in my early 40s then. It did change my life, really. It was fantastic, met some great people like yourself. So 20 odd years later, we're still talking, and just met some really good people who, I guess, instilled a belief that everything we were doing was to was for the betterment of the athlete and to support athletes' dreams. And if you recall, and I spoke actually with Anne Redgrave recently about it, that camp was all about Steve's 5th gold medal. Nobody had done that before, and to have an opportunity to support behind the scenes his journey. And actually, I flew home before his race, and my kids were quite young at the time, and I got them out of bed, like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. The Steve's 5th Olympic gold medal was so important to everything.
Well, as you were describing the Gold Coast camp, I had memories and flashbacks of a small group of us actually just bonding behind the scenes. In support of each other, because I think several of us going through the sort of first Olympic experience together developed a camaraderie of support, whether it's having a glass of wine in the evening or taking a half day off, a rare break to go to the beach, and some of those softer moments that actually just felt like you had the friendships developing that supported you through it. But I also recall I remember working with the rowing team at the time, Steve giving a speech to the rowing team about focusing. And I mean, I've got goosebumps now remembering it, but my goosebumps were off the chart listening to him, 4-time Olympic gold medalist, going for his 5th, shaping the philosophy of the team, which was extraordinarily powerful.
Very privileged to have listened to that. I haven't heard. I do know that Sir David Tanner did roll him out on occasion, at really important occasions, to make that kind of motivational and focused speech. And as I said, I've not been party to those. But yeah, super important. That it's interesting your comment about the half day off, and bringing people together. They're very different, and their motivations are very different. Although everybody comes together to support the athlete's dreams, but you have this group that recognise the importance of just a little bit of downtime, or a change is as good as a rest, and then you get another group who can't accept that. They take a half a day off, and then they want to come back because they're missing out on something, and it doesn't quite work. So I think in Sydney, when the team went down to Sydney, the kind of support team at the headquarters had the opportunity, I think, to go away somewhere, Manly Beach or somewhere that, a couple of days, 2 nights, 1 night downtime, and then come back more refreshed. We introduced that in Athens, and people were looking over their shoulders saying, I really don't like being away from the team anymore and I want to come back. So we haven't really followed that, but the importance of doing something different, having breaks, and you mentioned something which is super important, having this cohort of peer group support around you, is critical. And in the team, Steve, there's lots of people whose cups are half full. I like to think that my cup may not always be half full in the planning stages, but actually at the games, I've probably spent 18 months of my life living in Olympic villages, something like that. And I know.
What a statistic!
I know. Plastic plates or paper plates and plastic knives and forks and. But sometimes I think I was put on the planet to be in the Olympic Village. I love the environment there. I see the best version of myself in that environment. So, that's always been good, and looking forward to Paris too. See how that one is.
Well, maybe we'll get onto that. But can I just pick up on something you said there around? And we had Inigo Mujica, a specialist in peaking and tapering, on the podcast recently, and he talked about actually that there's this peaking and that sort of taper phase is stressful for athletes. There's a degree of anticipation and nerves as they get closer to the performance and knowing the outcome. But equally interestingly, there's some powerful studies showing the stress levels of coaches is very high too. And not surprisingly, and one of the best things I've seen in those holding camp environments is almost offsetting the reduction in training volume. Athletes and coaches are doing less, and that means that perhaps the hours that used to be filled and the structure and the systems that they were filling their days with, there's a little bit less now because they're alleviating that training stress. And then sometimes the behaviours come in where they don't know what to do with themselves. Some of the best examples I've seen, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts, is where actually there's some structured activities, there's some team meetings, there's a quiz night, there's things to do that provide people with things to give them to distract them from that performance focus, but bring them together too.
Yeah, I think in terms of our kind of core central delivery, whether it's at the preparation camp or in the village in competition mode, we recognise that deeply, and there is in the preparation camps in particular, it's an interesting piece because the quiz nights are those things that you talk about, that actually brings that multi-sport one team environment back together very, very closely. And I think in the UK, I think we think that having a preparation camp, if you're in the elite sporting environment, is the norm. It isn't at all. We're one of the very, very few National Olympic Committees, and Kevin Hickey, who I mentioned earlier, he drove this. Having this preparation camp was super important, bringing athletes together and having a multi-sport environment. But that tapering is that you mentioned, Steve, is really interesting, and it's often said it's more difficult to qualify for the games than it actually is at the games, and you see a real as the transition happens, you see a real calmness that kind of exudes. And one of the things that is interesting in the Paris cycle, primarily because of its closeness, and the majority of people have been to France, the majority of people have been to Paris, so it's not like the excitement of Rio de Janeiro or the excitement of Tokyo or Sydney, but back in the day, that distraction is a process that a number of team leaders are now working through. There's one sport in particular that actually wants to go on a patisserie making course in between the individual events and the relay, just as one of those distraction pieces. And I'm not so sure I'm going to be eating much of the croissants that are produced, but we'll see how they get on. But the point is well made and valid about that distraction piece, and you can be in an Olympic village and an Olympic environment for a very, very long time, The Olympic Village in Paris opens on the 18th. The 2 hockey teams are arriving on that day. We obviously hope that they will go on, and so as they progress through the tournament, they're likely to be in that environment for over 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks. That's a very, very long time to be in almost institutionalised living. So we'll be working hard with those guys, and great that Danny Kerry's come back into the fold, appointed last week. From September. Superb.
Oh, fantastic. And so, just for anyone who's listening, what is the role of a chef de mission? Does it kick in at a certain time? Because I'm obviously, you're not just kicking about for 3.5 years, and then you're packing everybody off and hosting them. What's the role at the games, and then what's your role in the lead up to the games?
It's. I think the title chef de mission makes it almost quite difficult to describe sometimes, and I think it. I did Talk Sport last week, and I said, I laughed and I said, it's a fancy title, and it is. I mean, formally, it's chief of mission, and so historically, and this is what you have in the Foreign Office. Historically, you have it's a mission. But I guess in today's world, it's almost the head coach, the team manager, the team leader of the entire delegation, and that is the 350 athletes and the 750 support staff. So my role is, formally to be the voice of the team, to front the media, and to I guess set the mission and vision, but I like to think that as a leader, and a leader of a Great Britain Olympic team, which is a huge privilege, an opportunity to select the right appropriate team, the leadership coaching team for an Olympic Games, to create that environment which is pertinent and right for that particular games. It's not a historical, you've been alongside me for 15 years, therefore you should be. Is this the environment that this particular Olympic Games creates and is presenting itself? Who are the best people to actually deliver support to the athletes on the field of play? What is that team, and what does it look like?
Is that the headquarters staff, or the sports-based staff, team leaders for the sport?
I'm predominantly talking about the headquarters staff, okay. But the headquarters leadership staff, and by that, it's not just British Olympic Association staff, like Dr. Charlotte Cowie, for example, is leading she'll be our chief medical officer. One of the things, just on that, I want to create a legacy of more women in the leadership team. So I've brought Frankie Carter-Kelly from Commonwealth Games England, who's the chef de mission for Team England at the next Commonwealth Games, wherever that might be. Bringing her in, and having Nikki Cambaro as chief physio. So we've got some really strong women as leaders in the team. So that's an important plank for me. So when I looked at Paris, and when I looked at the presentation, or Rio de Janeiro, Tokyo, it doesn't really matter. It's what is the mission, first of all, and it's my responsibility to set that mission. So 2016, I wanted to make history. I wanted the British athletes to win more medals post-hosting, post-London, and nobody had ever done that before. So that became our mission. I have a private mission for Paris, and I have a public, top 5 in the medal table, top European nation. These are important planks that everybody needs to understand. This is what we're actually striving to do. This is what we're striving to support athletes to achieve. Selection of the leadership team to deliver that. Imparting all of that to not only our stakeholders and patrons and donors, but that team leader fraternity, so the governing body team leaders understand that that's what I want to do. Embedding a very, very strong culture. I actually find, Steve, that if somebody says, what's the culture of Team GB, I do actually find it quite difficult to describe and to present, and everybody says, well, I know what a good culture looks like, I know what a bad culture looks like. It's a bit deeper than that for me. I want to, I want not just a top 5, not just over 60 medals, not just top European nation, but I want us to leave a very strong legacy, which I've partly mentioned, which is more women in leadership positions. I want to leave a legacy of not just inspiring a next generation, because everybody kind of says that, but really having some deep, meaningful conversations that athletes can go back into their communities and really talk about the importance of choosing sport, choosing a healthier lifestyle, and we know the difficulties that the Western world is facing in terms of the health of the nation and so on. These really important things. And then just looking at the Paris environment, what complexity does that actually present? So part of my role is to set that blueprint about this is how we're going to deploy in that environment. This is where our performance preparation camps are going to be. This is our performance lodge. This is our support structure. This is the environment to get as many personal coaches into the environment as we possibly can. This is how we can maximise support. And then just checking and challenging that all the time. And I think we've become much more sophisticated in terms of our not just asking difficult questions, but immediate hot debriefs about how did that go, what can we do better, what do we need to do less of. But doing that all the time on the journey. We have a very sophisticated program management group that supports us in that. And then at the games, I mean, I'm very privileged to have the opportunity to be right in the heart now of standing up in front of athletes and selecting them and talking to them, Steve, about the amazing opportunity through their dedication, hard work, to become an Olympian. And an Olympian that goes back to 1896. Great Britain have never ever missed an Olympic Games or an Olympic Winter Games since 1896, and we call it our unbreakable chain. And I talk to the athletes about how they are now part of this culture with our values and our behaviours and our anchors that go right back to 1896, and the importance of the Paris cohort, what we want to do as a Paris team, the legacy we want to leave, in addition to supporting their their personal ambitions. I don't throw it all into one 20-minute chat because it's a bit can be a bit overwhelming. So there's a lot of subliminal but also overt messaging that we do, and if you came up to Kitting Out, and the athletes who may be listening to this that come through this will now resonate. They'll see a big huge wall of that unbreakable chain, bringing out some really key people. Our first black athlete, our first Muslim athlete, Mosa B, he carrying the first Muslim, when I selected him to carry the flag in Tokyo. These are really important moments in British Olympic history. Charlotte Cooper, first woman to win a gold medal. Anita Lonsborough, first woman to carry the flag in the opening ceremony. Really, really important moments that we pick out, and it's a lot to take in. In a kind of 15-minute section now, and it's a lot to take in when we talk to the athletes. But as I mentioned, Jess Ennis-Hill fronting up the Kitting Out video, inspirational woman in her own right, Olympic champion in her own right, talking about the symbols of lion and rings and what it means to be an Olympian, and and how it started for her and everybody else, being just kids running around in the playground to becoming and having an ambition to become an Olympian.
Amazingly powerful to hear that is a focus that is beyond sport. It's almost a duty, a civil responsibility, some sort of shared purpose. Is that what you're aiming to try and instill as you're introducing that concept, perhaps to some people for the first time? They've been thinking about training splits, and they've been thinking about counter movement jump at a certain level so that they can do X, Y, and Z. What's your motivation there?
Well, we do have a greater purpose. I think I think whether it's the England football team or the England rugby team or Home Nations rugby teams or the British Lions team, cricket, professional sport, tennis, whatever it happens to be, I think that there is a responsibility to athletes now to have this greater purpose. So that is partly driving me. But what I would say, Steve, and I used to have sleepless nights over this, but I don't anymore. Not because I don't care, but because somebody told me not to worry about it, and that is that. And I talk to all of the team leaders about this. This one team philosophy, this support network that we're putting in place, and the athletes are putting in place for everybody. And excuse the maths, but 15% get it straight away. Particularly if you've been on your second, third Olympic Games, 15% get it straight away. There might be 60% who think to themselves, the 21 rows that I talked to last week out of the 42. Oh, this is interesting. I'd like to be part of this. I'd like to learn a little bit more. And then, there's the 15-20% that are just doing it for themselves. And I used to worry about the 10, 15, 20% that are just doing it for themselves. And I used to worry about standing up and talking in front of them, and they're thinking, I'm really not interested in this. I'm really not interested in this. And I used to worry about how I spoke to them. I used to worry about whether they would be saying anything, detrimental to the higher mission and the higher purpose. And then somebody said to me, it was Owen Eastwood actually, who's a performance coach. He said, "Don't worry about those guys, Mark. Don't worry about those. Concentrate on the middle group that you can actually shift." And over time, over 2, 3, 4, 5 cycles, however long it takes, that 20% at the bottom will become 15, 10, 5, 2%, whatever it happens and ends up to be. And I used to worry. The reason I used to worry about it, Steve, is because on occasion it used to be some pretty powerful individuals and leading Olympic sorry, my phone's going off. Leading Olympians, medalists, who I think, they're not really taking this in, and they're not really that interested. And I was always worried about, the individual that might say something or post something. But I'm well past that now. I'm pretty relaxed about all of that. And actually, some people's individual persona in a meeting isn't actually how they think and believe. And but we've been really lucky. I remember when Andy Murray won his a gold medal in Rio, so that became double Olympic champion, and he was flying out that night with Rafa Nadal to Cincinnati, but he came back in the village. It was really late. He had a very, very long match against Del Potro, and Mark Cavendish was there, and Mark, I'm privileged to be able to call Mark a friend now, and he, Andy, Mark and I just kind of had a 15-20 minutes of chatting, and Mark was brilliant. He just wanted to know everything about how everybody else trained and supported, and what their physio protocols were like, or post-match protocols. And he was like a sponge, and and that surprised me. I thought that he would have been one of those which was very much for himself, but absolutely not. Super team player. He's been brilliant.
Interesting though, isn't it? I mean, what's your observations for the leaders of the teams, leaders of people, so coaches and leaders in that environment? Because athletes perhaps are going to have a variety of different motivations, whether they have resonance with the broader mission, legacy, societal purpose, or the flag, whatever it might be. And others might just be, right, I just want to run a time. I just want to produce a performance and not overcomplicate it necessarily. But leaders have a more broader responsibility. What are your observations of some of those leaders that have continued to excel and inspire a higher level of performance from their team?
I think if you look at the kind of the 4-year cycle, Steve, that's or 5 years, 6 years, whatever it is, that when you take some very, very good people who are very driven, incredibly focused, I mentioned Dave Brailsford earlier, but he's taken different paths now. But in the current crop, the Chris Spices or the Stephen Park, Sparky, from cycling, was at sailing, now at cycling. These guys, incredibly driven, but are experienced enough to understand the bigger purpose and the higher purpose. I think, when you look back in 20 years' time and the history books are written about lottery funding, I think part of the challenge about trying to deliver a higher purpose is the success of individual athletes and the success of teams and success of individual sports that make up Team GB. It is predicated on performance outcomes and performance success and their pipeline to the next Olympic Games, which necessarily determines their lottery funding, and there's been some pretty brutal decisions that were made in the last cycle. Good example, badminton winning a medal for the first time in a very long time in Rio de Janeiro, zero funding for the Tokyo cycle, and then through negotiation you might just get a little bit of support, but we're talking about going from million pound investments to very little if the pipeline isn't quite there. Fencing haven't qualified for this particular games. My heart kind of goes out to the young fencers coming through, because I don't know what that support now looks like. So to answer your question about leadership and those leaders, they've got this real pressure during the games to deliver, to almost safeguard their sport. And actually a lot of athletes feel that as well, that pressure is put on them by team leaders or performance directors. We need you to medal tonight, to save our sport type mantra. And the enormity of that, and some of the athletes, track and field in particular, have come out and been fairly public on that they felt that the weight of the future of their sport is on their shoulders if they do or don't perform in an Olympic Games. So that I'm very conscious of that. I don't push that one at all. But again, in terms of your question around leadership, some very, very good leaders in the Olympic environment. But it's such a bizarre world, isn't it, the Olympic Games? It's so alien to everything else. You've got 50 World Championships taking place over 17 days with thousands of moving parts, hundreds of athletes in competition at any one moment in time, hundreds of athletes out of competition at any one moment in time, and to get that balance and understand the rhythm and cadence of a games is super, super critical for me as a leader, but also as the individual leaders of the various sports are as well.
And is that a responsibility either for you, who've been there and done it through several different cycles, or for those leaders to keep the focus, to avoid just being distracted by the noise, and focus on what people can control, and also what they're there to do, as opposed to thinking about the potential outcome and the ramifications for funding or for something else?
I think it's a balance. I think very much it's a balance, and what's important in that, Steve, is when I talk about the Paris environment, how are we going to deal with that? When I talk about the Tokyo or the Rio environment, who do I want to be alongside to deliver the right messages, the right environment to do that? And experience counts for everything in Olympic Games, which is why you and I both work with Charlotte Cowie, Dr. Charlotte Cowie, on the Gold Coast actually. And delighted that she's back. Nikki Kambaro led the team in Tokyo, led the the Commonwealth Games Team England in Birmingham 2 years ago. So this will be our third time. It's her fourth Games, but third time that she'll be in a leadership capacity, and to have these supporters, this support network around you that actually can quickly identify and diffuse some fairly tense situations or moments, or recognise an increase in tension or increase in stress, and have that. We've all. I mean, what's very different now, Steve? I'm laughing because what's very different about us working 20 years ago is we didn't have kids. Or they were very, very young. Now they've grown up and they've gone through a lot of the issues that we deal with having our own children. Some very difficult decisions at sometimes, and and being fairly fatherly. You can identify. And work through with a bit more maturity a lot of the issues that a lot of athletes are going through at the time. And I think I always say, you got to be pretty cool. Just be cool, have fun, and if you want to get the best out of everybody in the team, you've got to be pretty relaxed. So actually, somebody ran this morning, across the hall at Kitting Out before we'd opened. And I was with a colleague, and I say, I don't. Running creates a message. It creates a tension. It creates a stress. Something's happened. The reason somebody's running is they're either late or something's happened. And I don't like to have any of that around the Olympic environment at all. I like everybody to be completely on top. And one of the things I say to everybody, and they're sick and tired of me saying it, is if you don't know what's happening tomorrow, you will never ever ever catch up, because there's so many moving parts. So everybody just needs to be on top, and I think if you're on top of it, it's a pretty good environment to be in.
That preparation piece.
Yeah.
What? So no running, except for unless you need to run away from something. But just on that though, Mark, if you are chief of mission and you're guarding the culture, the performance, the facilities, the environment, the schedule, would you call that out if someone's running? Is that would you go and tap that person on the shoulder and say, hang on a minute, we can't have that? What's your responsibility for sort of the team norms of being able to mark that behaviour?
Yeah, 100%. The skill, though, is, and I don't always get this right. The skill is how you address that, I think, and typically, I would, I would do it in a very engaging, I would like to think, way, and I think, and you'll know this, hot debriefing everything immediately creates a good interaction, which leads to a performance innovation and performance advantage. That is absolutely true. So having those not necessarily difficult conversations, but addressing behaviour swiftly. I mean, somebody said to me, the behaviour you walk past is the behaviour you accept, and I've always remembered that. And whether it's a comment that's made or a derogatory comment, or whether it's somebody running, if you walk past that behaviour, that you're accepting that behaviour, and I've always remembered that. It was Ed Barney actually, who's just gone to cricket from hockey.
I heard it from Ben Ryan actually, who's on the podcast. So it's doing the rounds, but it's a good one though, isn't it? It's like you ignore it, and then that's the level that your team is at.
Yeah, completely, and you don't drive a performance advantage effectively if all of these little things that over a 4, 5, 6 week period at an Olympic Games have all become have built up and become the norm. That isn't what a Great Britain Olympic team is about. So so I never ever ignore it, but I try and do it in a way which is palatable. And I think there is a skill in that, and I need to learn better, and I recognise that I need to learn better about addressing and talking about those things. Every day is still a school day.
There's a wonderful openness to your perspective that you shared through our discussion in terms of I haven't quite got this right yet, but I'm still learning, I'm still adapting, as well as the recognition that uniquely you can't cut and paste from one Olympics to another, that the environment, but also societally changing. You know, our children are different now than we were. So they're growing up experiencing different things. They're dialed into what's happening online. And actually, we didn't have a phone all the time. I think, as we were going through that experience.
I'll tell you a little story. We've got a very talented young sport climber in Toby Roberts. He's 18. Just coincidentally, he lives reasonably close, 5 miles away from me, something like that. And I turned up on his doorstep. He'd won a named quota play, so he'd won a named play. So he is in the Olympic Games in Paris in sport climbing. He will be formally selected, I think, on July the 3rd, something like that. So I'll see him here up at the National Exhibition Centre. But I thought to myself, an 18-year-old kid who's never been to Olympic Games before, probably really wasn't quite on his radar, but he had a fantastic Europeans. What's going through his mindset? What is he thinking about going to Paris for the first time in an Olympic environment? So I took one of my little boys with me, actually, just to make it look a bit more bona fide than somebody middle-aged that's rocking up on his doorstep. And I rapped on his door, and he'd actually just come back from Salt Lake City where he was in competition. His father's his coach, and I just stood on his doorstep and I talked to him for 15-20 minutes. They were literally off the plane, and his father apologised later and said we should have invited you in. I don't really think he knew who I was, but I just said, look, I'm leading the team in Paris. I'm looking forward to you being there and supporting you, and just want you to know that I live down the road and anything I can do for you, and you're hugely successful. For you to be part of the team. And I just want, going back to that message, I want you to, to really feel that you're part of this much bigger team. And although it's your first Olympic Games, you have a point to make and a voice, and please talk to me. Those little things I think are, for me, super important. Yeah.
And so a couple of last questions if I can, Mark. What's left to do before the Games? And then I'll ask you another question if that's okay.
We've just gone through a very, very interesting piece at the British Olympic Association. We as I mentioned at the top of the call, we're privately funded, but we've had a very, very good couple of years. So we've got some fantastic sponsors and partners with us now. NatWest, British Gas, Aldi have continued with us. They're continuing to 2032. Really long partnership, but we've got some very, very powerful brands that are backing us, which has allowed us to create a very, very small £250,000 performance pot. So in May of this year, May of this year, I went back out to the sports to say, is there anything that we can now do financially to support your final preparations, which may have been an additional camp in Paris, so the trampoline team went to the preparation camp for a week and so on and so forth. So there's been some really good technology or technical innovation. There's been some really good investment in coaching, in leadership, some really good investment in on the ground training and familiarisation in the preparation camp. So that £250,000 released another 230,000 from sport, so it almost became a £500,000 pot. So we've gone back out. There's a little bit of a saving because fencing, for example, didn't qualify. There was about £12,000 allocated to them. So we've gone back out to the sports to say, is there anything else? So when you ask, what are the final things with the sports? That is the final thing. We're right in the middle of Games Ready now, so we're going out to all of the sports to really talk to those selected athletes about the performance environment that we're creating, what it might look like and what it might look like for them. just so they become more familiar. I'm right in the heart of selection now, so boxers last Friday, rowing on Thursday, Emily Campbell on Wednesday, last week weightlifting, this week we've got the gymnasts and trampolinists. Next week we've got hockey. So for me now, it's an opportunity to stand in front of those athletes as we select them, formally invite them to be part of a team, and it's not just a letter that says that your selection is predicated on your continuing support from your governing body and your health and well-being and fitness and all that kind of stuff. It's about presenting them with a card, again, which recognises and absolutely specifically, Steve states, you are part of a group of athletes that go back to 1896, and it's a lovely embossed in gold card that is a keepsake for them, for their families. So when I talk about overt and subliminal messaging, this is one of those overt, so I'll draw that out and talk about the culture of the team and how important that is, and obviously talk about how delighted I am that they've been selected, and more importantly I think that Paris being almost a home games, they can showcase their talent in front of families and friends that they couldn't in Tokyo because of the COVID games, and so I'm on that journey now. It's we're starting kitting out today, which is a great opportunity for athletes to have their Adidas, Ben Sherman and formal wear providers opening ceremony and closing ceremony, just get a little bit of that flavour. So I'd say we're in a sweet spot really. It's a nice moment to be part of this, and then I go to I leave to go to Paris on the 10th of July, formally enter the team at the delegation registration meeting on the 12th of July, and if it all goes well, we're into the village and surrounding venues to build our what is a fantastic preparation camp at Saint-Germain-en-Laye and in Reims, and our performance lodge in the lovely city of Clichy, close to the village. So we're, as I said, I think we're in very, very good shape.
Mark, can I just ask you one more question? Just conscious of time.
Yeah, please
do.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
And my memory of I think it was just prior to the 2004 games. I was this time of year, around June, I was in the Far East with Bernie Cotton, scoping out holding camps.
Yeah.
How much of your work now is in anticipation of Los Angeles, and uniquely we know the next one after in the Gold Coast? And also, what are the potential challenges that you're seeing for the Olympic movement and preparation for performing at the Games?
Yeah, just maybe take that last one first, Steve. What's interesting about the LA cycle is there, and just a bit of terminology. Aquatics is a sport. But within aquatics, as you know, you've got swimming, diving, water polo, artistic swimming, marathon swim. So there's kind of 5 disciplines that make up aquatics. Now in London there were 26 sports. In LA there's 35 sports. So it's grown so big now. So one of the challenges I think that the Olympic movement has, and one of the challenges that the British Olympic Association has as a member organisation, is that we're bringing new members in that perhaps are just there for one cycle. Breaking is a good example, just there for one cycle. We'll see what happens in Los Angeles, because lacrosse is in, cricket is in the games, lacrosse is in the games, squash is in the games, flag football is in the games, and it's whether Brisbane embrace and take on some of these or reintroduce other new sports. So there's a bit of ebb and flow. There's 28 core sports now, and with a bit of ebb and flow over and above that. And what that means for us is that where we would typically take, say, 350 athletes to the Games, we're probably in the 450 mark, because actually we're not bad at lacrosse, we're not bad at flag football, believe it or not. We're purport to be pretty good at T20 cricket. So and baseball, softball is back in the game. So our numbers in team sports will be big, which will be fantastic. the introduction of cricket is to embrace better the Indian market. That's an unashamed direction that the IOC want to go in, and so that will be likely to be on the east coast of the state. So you've got the west coast, Los Angeles, but then you've got some sports that may or may not be on the east coast, one of which will be cricket for time zone television viewing for the Indian market. So all of these complexities are beginning to emerge. But to answer one of your earlier questions, our planning is very, very advanced. In fact, we've selected and are deep into negotiations with our preferred preparation camp, which, if it comes off, which I expect it to do over the next 2 months or so, will be I think will be the preparation camp to end all preparation camps. It's a superb venue to the north of Los Angeles, and I think the British team will be very, very, very comfortable and happy there and train well. Yeah.
It always just struck me as such an advantage, mentally perhaps intimidating the opposition, that we've booked ours already, don't and you'd get a sense from the local organising committees that we were ahead of the game, that we were one of the first movers, and that's felt like a competitive advantage that seems as though you've been able to maintain all through this time.
I certainly believe that, Steve. I certainly believe that. It's like, where the Brits gone? Why have they chosen that? What do they know that we don't know? And we are part of now, and you were part of it, and still are in your role now. And I do say this, and I do mean it, Steve. We have the most sophisticated high performance system in the world. British athletes win more medals across more sports than any other nation. British athletes win more gold medals across more sports than any other nation. The institute structure, the home country sports council structure, the UK sport investment, the British Olympic Association, the Commonwealth Games agencies now, associations now, in particular Commonwealth Games England, they're all part of this very sophisticated high performance piece that is increasingly working to the same agenda. A little bit more work to do, I think, in talent pathways and stuff, but we're trying to address that with another little project that I've got, which I'll talk to you about at some stage. But it's we're very privileged, I think, to be part of what is a steamroller. It's an avalanche. It's almost unstoppable. So I'm very excited for the next 6 weeks or so.
Well, power to you, Mark, and thanks so much for spending some time to reflect and share the work that you do. It always strikes me that you've got such a deep grasp and a deep knowledge of what's required. What does it take to actually go and take this team, as you say, logistically, a huge operation, and such clarity that you have in describing that. But what I've always really loved and enjoyed is that presence that you have, and that calming presence. I can imagine is just inspiring, but also empowering for teams. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Steve, and I'm grateful to you, and for the opportunity to maybe just reflect. It's always quite cathartic for me just to reflect back on journeys, and I probably don't do it enough, and people say, oh, you must have loads of stories, and I think, oh my god, I can't think of any. So when you probe and prod and try and get these stories out of me, it's helpful for me too. So thanks very much.
Well, best of luck. Hope it goes well.
Appreciate it, Steve. Thanks.